Yeah, so that's the interior contrasexual counterpart of the individuality. And the rule is that for a woman, the animus leads her into her unconscious, and the opposite is true for the man, where the anima leads him into his unconscious. If we're called to really work out that problem, and particularly for women, but it can happen for men as well, those dynamics of those psychic structures can play out in relationship.
Welcome back, everybody, to Joshua's Magic. I'm joined by a guest today, Risa, from Soul Science by Risa and Core Integrity. And she's an astrologer and a occult practitioner, and she has several different hats. And one thing today we're going to be talking about is her interest and knowledge about archetypes. So stick around for that. Welcome, Risa.
Great to be here. Thanks, Joshua.
So archetypes, what are those? I mean, people probably have some idea of them, but what's your understanding in the most basic sense?
Well, I'm making reference for the most part to the Jungian work and the Jungian pantheon. And what we're talking about here is baseline patterns of consciousness that are part of our psychic substrate, and they have evolved along with our physiology. So in the same way that when the body is out of balance hormonally, chemically, when the diet's off, when there's an injury and the musculoskeletal system's compromised, the system gets thwarted. It reflects with an imbalance, and there's a disease or pain as a result. And so in the same way, this is the nature of archetypal content within our personal unconscious. These patterns of perception have evolved alongside our physical environmental experience as humans. And so in the same way, when we get through our own personal experience or through the cultural programming, the disruption in these patterns, then they show up as certain neuroses or pathologies or fragments, the way in which the psyche and the personality becomes fragmented. So this is really what the Jungian work, with the goal being individuation for people who want to go take it to its ultimate conclusion, really. It's really about the digging into the psychic substrate, and this is why the dream and working with the dream is really important, or a cornerstone for how that works. And that, so this has been a very big part of my journey. I mean, I'm not a Jungian myself. I have worked with the dream space. I work with a Jungian analyst, and the Jungian analyst I work with has actually got she's part of that direct lineage. She's connected by a few degrees to Jung himself. Not to use an appeal to authority fallacy there, but it does.
She's the best analyst, frankly.
She's the
Believe
best.
me, I know, okay? Because I'm so good at this stuff, and she's the best, and everybody tells me so.
Yeah, everyone else is a loser. Yeah, but that does say something about, because even in that realm, you still, even within the Jungian
there's an energy
stratosphere,
connection, right? It's more than just reading it. I mean, there's an energy connection even from books too. But
yes,
you know, when you're working with somebody, there's that morphic field or that energy of consciousness that you can tap into, and then bring that forward, at least to some degree.
Yes, yeah. And it was interesting when I found that out about her, because I had for some time, because I'd been working with an awareness of some of the archetypal information, I'd been having some information come through the dreams, and I'd wanted to for some time to go into analysis, and I'd searched into a few different areas, but it just never quite clicked. I didn't quite resonate with the people I saw, and I just figured it wasn't the right time. And then, as these things tend to go, there was a synchronistic moment where she just popped up, and she had just written a comment on something, and just the way she phrased it, and she said something to the negative mother complex, and it just hit something in my awareness where I went, oh yeah. And that night I had a very dynamic dream. It was like that, as soon as I had that information, the unconscious was like, yes, now I can like reconfigure things and show a new layer of information. And I thought, okay, this is the woman I got to work with. Naturally, if you have that sort of response, it's the path of least resistance in this case.
Yeah, I had a similar thing with the psychosynthesis stuff. I don't know if you know what that is at all, but I was looking into some life coaching stuff because I'm going to go in that direction at some point. But this one psychosynthesis group appealed to me, and I saw other ones, and there wasn't this sort of kind of inner resonance. And I found out that one of those people was actually like directly connected with Roberto Assagioli, who founded psychosynthesis. I don't know if that's the reason I was drawn to that group. It might be something else, but you know, it's important. There's some reason when you feel that pull to a certain thing, there's something there that you got to
Yeah,
go.
and you must, it's likely that you're pulled into whatever that essential fabric is. Not that it couldn't be an equal level of resonance with someone who's not directly connected to the founder, but let's say to the whatever extent the central hub of a certain movement or philosophy is really coming from that real point of individuality of that person, that unique core. There's a certain integrity that comes with that. You certainly get that with Jung. Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a disciple of Jung, and she's a great popularizer. I mean, she's no longer living, but she's got lots of great, people find her a little bit more accessible than Jung himself, and she's a great translator of some of his stuff. And she yeah, I'm going to digress a little bit, but she really had that particular quality of that no, she said that people are necessarily contained in Jung. That's where I was getting at.
What does that mean?
So that people, well, because he went into the psychic substrate, he went into the collective unconscious. It's he was a voyager. He mapped this territory, and so people, she would note that people would come and try and one up Jung, or they'd have this reaction to his depth where it would necessarily trigger a sense of inferiority in them. And rather than have a sense of humility towards that, it would react into that tendency towards resistance or superiority, or, well, I think this, and as if, which is not the same as actually coming to a conclusion through your own deep process. So he went so deep into the psychic substrate, and he managed to stay sane, because this is the other thing too, when you're dealing with archetypal information, you're going into the watery oceans of the psyche, and it's very easy to get taken. I mean, a lot of Jungians work with people who are schizophrenic in their nature, and because there's a lot of archetypal and psychological content of the unconscious in people with those sorts of pathologies. So he mapped this territory.
You can't just follow whatever the machine elves tell you to do. You have to have some skepticism.
Yeah. And it required, just to be able to relate to that material, it requires a great deal of precision and a humility and dedication. And because he was able to go into those depths, people, so I always say, as much as the Jungian work has been somewhat popularized, people now, it's part of colloquial language, almost the shadow, or the concept of dream work, or projection, or anima and animus, and there's some sort of topical, conceptual, widespread access to those sorts of concepts, but still very few people actually have been able to relate to them, because it doesn't become yours until you actually see yourself when you're possessed by an archetype, or when you start
let's
having
ground
the
it
dream
in exploring a few of these before we get too deep into other things. So what are some of the major archetypes that that stand out, that are worth thinking about or understanding in your estimation?
I think what commonly hits people when they begin analysis, or when you're first trying to bring your individuality into wholeness, is often we come up against the parental images. So there's the mother archetype and the father archetype. And so if we think again, if the archetypes are both, there's separate entities into themselves, but they're also part of a very slippery, subtle system. So if we think of it like a garden, and your psyche is a garden, but there's all kinds of weeds and thorns, or the plants themselves, let's say that a single plant type is an archetype, but they're all crossed over into each other, so they kind of overlap and are enmeshed. So the mother archetype for most people when they start is, let's say if you're a man in particular, the mother archetype is tied up with the anima, because they haven't been differentiated yet. So that is,
and the
first
anima
image of
is
the
female energy, right? And the
that
anima
is
the male energy.
Yeah. So that's the interior contrasexual counterpart of the individuality. And the rule is that for a woman, the animus leads her into her unconscious, and the opposite is true for the man, where the anima leads him into his unconscious. So this idea of,
because you're aware of, if
interior,
you're a man, you're aware of the male force. That's your obvious conscious thing. but the thing you're less conscious of is the female force, and the reverse, right?
And that corresponds to the physiology too, because we know that all fetuses, let's say, start off as female. So it's not the idea of, a woman has even in her physiology, there's echoes of what then would become the male if her chromosomes were different, and the same for a male. So it's the same thing where there's, and it even at if we go to metaphysical principles or Hermeticism or something, it's like at the as above, so below, or the macrocosm, microcosm, or the yin yang thing. So the one necessarily contains the other, and that's also true of the individual psyche. So there's the anima and animus, and often that if we're called to really work out that problem, and particularly for women, but it can happen for men as well, those dynamics of those psychic structures can play out in relationship, or we see reference to that in pop culture all the time. I mean, Twilight, Edward Cullen, the vampire, I mean, it's a classic animus sort of figure. Or what is it that makes a vampire attractive, or the beast, Beauty and the Beast, the untamed masculine, unintegrated masculine. So fairy tales.
Well, isn't there, particularly in the Twilight and the vampire stuff, aren't these in a certain way feminized men? Like, Justin Bieber is not the same as The Rock, right? Like, they're both appealing to women, but one of them has a different, The Rock is definitely a masculine figure, but you have like Justin Bieber and the guy in Twilight, maybe not the same guy in other movies, but at least in Twilight, there's not this kind of alpha macho quality, right? It's like a different sort of thing,
Yeah, and there's different, I mean, and this is where it gets individual. I mean, the qualities of a woman's animus, there's a certain, like, there's the archetype is universal, but what colors the animus is different and unique for every person. So the qualities of the woman's animus, if she hasn't made the animus conscious, both in the positive and in the negative sense, because the animus and the anima can be negative, and that's where you get the vampire, the demon lover, or the succubus, incubus, and all these sorts of things. But they get projected externally, and certain figures, certain celebrity icons, certain fairy tale creatures, characters seem to characterize a certain quality in that. And there's phases of maturity as well. I mean, of course, for an adolescent male, his anima quality is in her infantile or adolescent stage of development, which is primarily concerned with erotic images. And so there's the ideal woman is the pornographic model or the Playboy chick, very generically speaking, of course. And so there's a counterpart for a woman as well, where it's the stage of development. The image of the contrasexual ideal is reflective of certain degrees of maturation and development and all of this. And so the idea then, if we're integrating it, becomes making these parts conscious.
So that word contrasexual, can you explain that a little bit?
Contra just meaning the opposing or the opposite. I like when you say contradict, contra. So contrasexual, my contrasexual part is my interior masculine, and yours the feminine. And so that to wed the anima, or to wed the animus, in a woman, a well-developed animus can give her a great creative spirit, a boldness, as Jung described, an interior strength that compensates for her outer softness in terms of physiologically being of the more gentler stature. And in the highest possible articulation, Jung described really well-developed and integrated animus women being diviners and seers of their time, because their interior masculine quality of objectivity, of insight, of reflective capacity would then pair with her essential nature of femininity, which would bring her that inherently, as part of a woman, that quality of subjective sensitivity of like, what's really going on in this exact moment right now, bringing it to the relativity of the moment. And when you pair those two, then it would create that sort of the vision, seeing the future, or being able to respond to the spirit of the times in a way, something like that, and having messages that can be delivered. And then for a man, the anima in its most mature, developed state would be the incarnation of the wisdom principle. So it would take him out of purely being a man of principle or logic or rationality, and it would bring him that interior subjectivity, which would allow him to tap into the personal truth of any specific situation. So, a lot of Jungian analyst men, for instance, would necessarily, I mean, part of it, and being an analyst, you have to go through analysis, so necessarily you integrate that. But just in terms of being a man being drawn to the field of psychology, it's a very, particularly Jungian psychology, depth psychology, that's someone that would be a male psyche that has that sensitivity to that interior realm, to the generally speaking, we say women are more interested in people. So psychology generally is more of a feminine dominated field. So if a man's drawn to that field, there's something of the interior qualities of subjectivity, of relativity, of the specific uniqueness of the human psyche in terms of that being, very personal.
I think that's a very valuable insight or thought today, because sort of men have lost the idea of masculinity to some degree, and there's this idea of like, well, you've lost it, so you have to be this kind of macho alpha guy, and if you're not, you're this beta bitch, effeminate man. And there's not this kind of like nuance of correctly incorporating the feminine aspect without being this kind of milk toast effeminate kind of guy.
Exactly.
Getting at there's a middle way, I guess, is the way to put it, right?
There's a middle way, and it's also like, it's seeing what the relationship is, because a lot of what we see today are men who are anima possessed, and that's not the same as integrating the anima. If the anima has the man,
how do you see,
I mean, he has
anima possessed today? What is
well,
that?
it plays up with in all kinds of ways, but being the sort of worst example would be, let's say, the man who never frees himself from the mother complex, and this is how it would be. The anima would be warped through the mother problem not being dealt with, and that's where you get this sort of colloquial image of the 40-year-old in the mother's basement, never having had a relationship, but then has all these porno subscriptions, and is constantly daydreaming or masturbating, where he's stunted.
So he's to some degree still in the child archetype.
Yeah, the mother complex has him, the mother demon, that's the overbearing mother where you can't go out into the world. And then his anima is also tied in with that, where it's just he's stuck in that adolescent phase where when the anima possesses him with these erotic fantasies, it pulls him out of his own masculine potency, because he's just daydreaming. It's daydreaming all the time of this erotic quality, and that's not the same as integrating Eros or actually having to step out of fantasy and into reality. And that's the part of the problem with the pornographic situation that we have now, and then also OnlyFans as well, because it feeds into the immature anima problem of man, and then women play up the anima in themselves, like women who are like happy to just milk that, but that means that women who do that also don't have a ground in their own feminine identity, because they're playing up an immature adolescent feminine image based on the immature psyche of the collective man at large, or something like that. And so that's one example. But the other way, which is a little bit more of nuanced and away from, like, so the erotic fantasies, is men who get possessed by their own emotionality, and they become reactive, bitchy, negative, these sorts of, like, where you see men who are like teenage girls, that they sort of have this quality, they bitch and moan, or they easily get taken into moods. And women, it's funny because women can get taken by the moody artist types, like, oh, he's so sensitive. But actually, men who have this so-called sensitivity, they're actually not sensitive enough to really be sensitive would be to catch the anima and then to relate to her, but they're getting possessed by her, and in that way they're not even related to life. It's more like
an outer sensitivity, right? To like,
well, it's they're not conscious, so they get taken by a mood and they become moody, but they don't see that they're not in themselves right now. And this is the thing where, like, in part of the red pill stuff and what the men are commenting is like, well, women say they want a sensitive man, but when a man is sensitive, then they attack it or shame it, or they don't want to hear it. And what's going on here is a few different things going on, but one of them is women may not be conscious of it, but they will negatively react to a man who is anima possessed. And for most men, that the work of the anima problem is, it requires quite a bit of sensitivity in the man to work out the anima problem. And so in the beginning, men can, really easy for them to get caught by her in terms of the emotional fits. And so there's a difference between I'm connected enough to my interior realm where I can be, I can really relate to my feeling nature. But being possessed by the anima into an emotional mood or reactivity is not the same as actually relating to the feeling. In fact, those sorts of things take you away from really relating. It's like you get taken by a depressive mood rather than going deeper and going, okay, why am I really unsatisfied? And once you get closer, and then you can dig into it and you go, oh, okay, there's some grief here, or like maybe there's a deeper trauma or something, and that would be actually relating to the feeling. Or it would be seeing that the anima is just playing out the succubus thing, and she's just like, I want to take you out of your life. I want to take away all your power. I want to grab you by the balls, so to speak. And so it just
And so
takes
that's
him out of.
internally like his a man's emotions are kind of playing that role. Is that kind of the idea there?
Yeah. And it's not a mature emotionality. It's a deception. It's if we go to the Eastern realm, it's Shiva Shakti, and the shadow of Shakti is that she's the temptress. She's testing consciousness. She's like, oh yeah, can you get hooked into I'm doing my sexy girl thing. Yeah, you're gonna fall for it. Oh yeah, here's an emotional mood. Oh, but it seems so real. It's so real, isn't it? And so the shadow of the feminine is always being sucked into this fantasy of life, but it isn't real. There's no truth there. There's no objectivity there.
And
And
so
that's not
having
the
that
same
inner
as,
state will you'll be more likely to go, get hooked on OnlyFans or meet up with sort of toxic but exciting women, that kind of thing, because it
yes,
stays in
yes.
you, so then it manifests out there, right? That's
You pick it unconsciously and you resonate with it. And so this is also the problem with, let's say, the manosphere or the red pill stuff, is that they're pointing out things that there are general truths and trends about the state of affairs in terms of the immature expression of women collectively and the immature expression of men collectively and all of this. But there's still the reality when we bring it, and this would be part of them integrating their own anima to even have this insight, which would be like, why am I specifically hooked on women like this? And it's always a freaking anima problem. And so it's like, why did you pick a woman who ended up, she was, oh yeah, it's like the shadow Lilith archetype, where she was, great in bed, but she was just nuts. And you found
yeah,
out that she'd been in an asylum. It's like, it's not just that Western women are crazy. It's like you picked that
yeah.
because you're always, and that's actually what it really means. And it's what's funny about this is I see all these men, they go, all these women are not wanting to take responsibility. And I'm like, yeah, but you're also not taking responsibility for your own possession. And so
Yeah.
this is the quarreling between the sexes. And if we tap
I
into,
think at the deeper, more intellectual red pill stuff, there's a lot of focus on that actually. But in the more
mm,
popular stuff that gets the most traction on YouTube and everywhere else, it's like,
yeah,
oh, look at these OnlyFans girls and look at how stupid they are and they're so ridiculous
hmm
expectations, blah, blah, blah. But at the
hmm
deeper core of at least some of it, there is very much like, well, what are you going to do about it? You can't change these laws, and maybe you can, and maybe there'll be some progress. But ultimately, like you say, it's it's in you. What can you do to protect yourself or live righteously or not attract bad people or whatever.
And there's a development here because let's say whatever the jewel of that red pill movement is, how it's helping men is it's helping them step into masculine clarity and solidifying themselves in their masculinity, and that's actually a necessary prerequisite to what would then be a more mature or the later phase of true integration of the anima and animus. And it's the same thing with the feminine psyche, where the negative animus can really feed off of the woman's energy when she's out of her own feminine essence. And it's the same thing. So if a man is in the same way that the Shakti, succubus, she preys on you to the degree that you're not clear, direct, certain, and you have a sense of mission and purpose in your life. So you get stuck in that
You
fantasy.
can be
And so
pulled
the man in
astray from where your purpose is, what your mission is, what your integrity is.
yeah, and so you
Tempted
have
over
to come
here or
into
whatever.
that. Yeah. And so it pulls you out of that clarity, and that's one of the shadow feminine qualities. Confusion, it's delusion, it's fantasy, it's the smoke screen of substance, because if Shakti is the Maya itself, it's matter, it's everything that comes with the relative existence. The shadow of that is the two snakes, right? This is the Christianity gets it half right, but then they miss the other one. But you know, there's the two snakes, the snake of deception and the snake of wisdom. And we'd say the snake of wisdom comes from the mature anima, let's say, in the man psyche, or the matured feminine. It's the wisdom of nature.
But there's that symbolism is even in the Bible. You know, like Moses made them sort of not worship, but sort of pray to this like statue of a snake at one point. And I think Christ talks about the serpent at some point. I can't remember exactly. But it's in there, references. You know, that there's a positive, you know, like you say, the serpent of wisdom, and then there's the serpent of matter, you know. In the Garden of Eden, you know, that's like the serpent of matter tempting you into, you know, coming out of heaven or Eden into physical generation and material existence and all the
involutionary
harshness
arc,
that comes with.
Yeah, and so necessarily there's an elevation into the masculine quality, and for a man, it's stepping into his direction, and so when we see in the culture at large in the West a denigration and a desacralizing of the masculine principle, which is absolutely what's going on, obviously. And I even picked up on this as a teenager before I knew anything about anything.
What was your experience of that?
I just had an overall sense of I always felt an interior sensitivity and a sympathy for men and boys suffering. I could feel I could always feel that there was an undercurrent of a real atrophying of masculine potency, and I couldn't put my finger on it consciously necessarily because it was just how things were, but I could feel it somehow. And also just
did it seem like men and boys were suffering more than women on a deeper level to you?
Well,
you were picking up on, or
it's hard to say because I had my own feminine problem that has come from a negative mother, and that has been it's a double-edged sword where the negative mother in a woman can help develop her masculine qualities, which makes her well, Marie-Louise von France had a negative mother, and she, because of her interior masculine qualities, she could work with men very effectively because she could translate the unconscious, because when you work to develop masculine qualities, it's objectivity and clarity, and so you know, it's that translating quality. So it's a kind of a segue. I just mention it though because I don't know how apt my feminine sensitivity was at the time to really, you know, there was a lot of things in my own feminine psyche which was unconscious.
So it might have been going on, but you just might not have been as in tune with that.
Yeah, it was a slightly different problem, but certainly I think, I mean, even just looking at it historically, we had this shift moving from the 70s to the 80s of, you know, it was women who didn't perform well in schools and men as a part of expressing their masculine qualities in school. It was like competitive academically, and they were getting the school captains, what do you have it in the States, the valedictorian, I don't know, whatever, which academic accolades, and part of the healthy expression of whatever masculine penetrative whatever was expressed in part through academic achievement, and that's just not what you see now at all. And
it's reversed. I heard some
completely reversed.
That 2 women for every man are going to graduate college in the next 10 years or 5 years or something like that.
And so you see that like the overall, because what we've said is that the masculine qualities of concentration, and also concentration is an aspect of penetration, and the negative feminine qualities, by the way, and this speaks to the mass immaturity of women at large, the negative feminine doesn't want to be penetrated by truth. That's what it is. And so, and then they demonize it. And so when you see all these people freaking out about Trump getting elected,
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States. President
it's like whatever you think about his politics, not to the point, but he gets this masculine projection from people because he's so ballsy. He just says whatever he wants, and that can be his own problem, but he doesn't give a fuck, and he just will fling his phallus out. That's what he's doing. It's this like phallic thing. And so the working class of America, like, there's not this intellectual, and all these, you see these like people of my generation, oh my God, Donald Trump, no, he's such an evil man. It's like,
I am so sorry to my world. I am so sorry to my world. This is not what we want.
Well,
you just can't, just no phallus, you know, this is a weird psychological.
Because you have to, nature abhors a vacuum. So what does this generation of women want to be penetrated by? If the truth is something they don't, there's got to be something else that they do, right?
Well, this is in part
Is it
what then
just
brings them
comfortable
into,
illusions, or what do you think?
well, it's like and I think it's part of an animus problem too, because a lot of women are possessed by a negative animus. And this is in part too the taking women out of their own feminine qualities. This is a whole thing unto itself, and it's connected to movement of feminism. It's connected to the pill, and to whatever degree that fucks with women's natural sensitivity to their own cycles. There's all kinds of things that pull women, and even the way that women pursue education. So like, yeah, okay, women are going into education, but it's based on a mode of educational training and development that really suits men better, like going into school, don't the college. It's not in alignment with natural cycles, and it's not connected to this more intuitive quality. So when you take women out of themselves, it's like their own interior masculine can possess them really easily and start eating off her psychic energy. And so what this means is that women have a negative animus problem that's in the unconscious, and the negative animus is a kind of raping demon. But then women are not conscious of how they are being killed off their own interior uniqueness.
Well, what
as
does that
women.
look like? Like make up an example. There's.
Yeah.
I was gonna say Betty, but but this is in the 40s, so Stacy.
Yeah.
Stacy's a 20-year-old girl. Maybe she's in college. What's that psychological complex? What's going on with that animus thing?
Well, let's say she doesn't have. Well, she's cut off from her feminine qualities, whatever. She's not focused on anything that we would consider feminine in nature. She's not tuned into the relational faculty. She's not connected to her own Eros as the source of her own vitality. She's focused
Could you explain
on
Eros a little bit?
Eros is the life energy that is like that direct connection into aliveness. I mean, this is what really draws men to women. It's the vital spark of life. That's what the women,
so it's like desire,
or the feminine.
but there's more to it than just desire.
It's not just desire. I mean, that's part of the, let's say, the immediate instinctual level of it, but it's passion. It's that which makes you alive with life. But it's also like, if I have a cup of tea and I just really sit and drink the tea, and I'm really in the sensuality of that experience. It's the ability to find richness in materiality, in the experience right now. It's embodied, it's of the body. And so when women are taken out of that, if they get overtaken by their minds in the negative way, and so it's like the negative qualities of the masculine are pulling her out of her own feminine life and are atrophying her capacity to center in that as part of her identity.
So how does the mind take over in this example? What's
well, it's like, I got to do this, like whatever is more of the masculine thing of, I got to achieve all this, and this is the goal, and it's a very calculated, even, I mean, the 9 to 5
sort of like the
if we
boss babe sort of idea.
Yeah, and it's not that a woman couldn't be ambitious, because that's not really to the point either. I mean, some women just have that. I mean, and even if you're an ambitious woman, it's just even more of a struggle, because eventually she has to integrate the animus anyway. And so ambitious women can work with that, but it means that they have to grapple with the animus problem. It's the same thing for men. They can have if men carry with them a deep interior sensitivity that can be turned into inner gold and make them quite a whole person, but it means they usually have to wrestle with the anima in a way that's more potent in that life than the regular average Joe or something who's just living the more masculine straight line, straight edge thing. But if it keeps a woman in, like, the masculine looks out into the future, the feminine brings it back down into right now in the fullness of life as it is right now. So if you're constantly out here looking, then there's where is the enjoyment or the aliveness or the beingness of life as it is here right now? And what we see too is women, this postpartum depression and anxiety, which is an experience that thrusts women into their instinctuality, is like on the rise. And some women get taken over by the qualities of instinctual femininity, which they've been completely disassociated from. And in that case, the mother demon comes and eats them. We're hearing more and more of these stories of women, they're normal, everyday women, they give birth and then they kill themselves. Something cracks open in the psyche of this inversion of the natural force of life.
And you
the
think is that they're
elemental-
living so much out of alignment with that it's such a huge leap that's why they
it's like their whole system has to
self-delete?
come back down, because that's what giving birth does. It brings you down into instinctuality. Motherhood is a very taxing instinctual process. It takes you out of even just what we were speaking about before we started the interviews, that the mind atrophying. I mean, the actual cognitive processes start, it's like you can't be that. That's why in the integrity of male-female relationship, it's like the mother takes care of the children, and then the man supports the mother. And that's it, rather than it getting all, and women can go, oh, my husband doesn't understand just how difficult it is. And it's like, of course not, because he doesn't bear this particular cross of this instinctual thrusting, this natural density and instinctuality that comes with this process.
Well,
and
you
there's a
can't,
responsibility.
you also can't acknowledge that men and women are different today.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you can, but there's this huge pressure against that. I mean, it's maybe falling away a little bit, but it's like, you're a misogynist if you don't think women can do everything a man can do, and they're basically equal. Like that's the thing, right? So like men aren't going to be like, oh, my wife needs to be taken care of and whatever, in a lot of cases, it's going to be like, well, she's just as strong as me, and I'm, a male feminist, and I believe that women can do everything. And then it switches for her, and then, he's potentially got to switch, and that's a tough decision, maybe not as tough as for her, but in some cases perhaps. But, everybody's actually disconnected, like you're saying. The whole thing is like, well, we're in this new level, and there really has been this disconnection from sort of instinctual or basic reality. Like in the past, that stuff was like too overemphasized, like, Joan
You're
of
only
Arc
your
being,
body.
Yeah, well, like Joan of Arc being killed because she was a cross-dresser, right? Because she wore armor, like that's, stuff like that. That's just like too over the top, right? It's too restrictive. There's not enough thought as to the principles going on there. But now it's like, well, none of that stuff's real, and everybody can be everything, and we're all equal, and it's like, well, no, there's all these nuances and these principles, and you got to understand them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's part of the immaturity of the anima and the animus problem in part. And the blending, the blurring of the sexes, where now it's like, oh, there's 58 genders or whatever. And it's like, no, even the hermaphrodite, not as a psychological symbol. I had a dream show up some months ago working with my analyst with a hermaphrodite in the dream. And I had an animus figure in the dream was showing me something. He was showing me how to kick a ball. And he's like, you have to get it. You have to kick the ball just like that. So that's like an animus, positive animus showing me something about the unconscious. He's like, okay, now you've got your opponent coming up. Now this one's a hermaphrodite. You've got to watch out for them because they're tricky. And then I woke up and I spoke to my analyst about it. She's like, yeah, hermaphrodites in dreams are like, they're subversive figures because it shows you something that hasn't been differentiated and separated out. And that's very different from an individual who has an integrated anima, an integrated animus, and they're a whole psyche. Because we can go, oh, well, they're a hermaphrodite, but it's more like, or it's the higher turn of the hermaphrodite where you've got the inner marriage, the alchemy there. But
it was very
generally
interesting.
speaking,
There was this movie, I think it was called Revelations, and it was about this woman who was an alchemist and coming together with this man. They were like researching something that had to do with like Christ and like the Shroud of Turin and stuff. But it illustrated this idea of like the higher turn of the spiral of the divine hermaphrodite, right? The man and the woman coming together to create the Star of David, or whatever the other word for it is. You have the two triangles and they come together, and that forms that six-pointed star.
Yeah, and it's true that there's a higher turn of evolution where, I mean, even the ageless wisdom teachings say that an earlier iteration of our human development, we were hermaphrodites. And so, but then why would we, if we started off as hermaphrodites, why would then we then polarize at the physical level into male and female bodies? It's because you have to actually go into the opposite before you can integrate and transcend it. And so it's the same thing it's like a pre-personal state of consciousness for the baby who's one with the mother. It's like, oh, but they're one with the mother. That's like enlightenment. It's, yeah, but you haven't differentiated yourself as an individual. And so we say then you become an individual, and then you grow up, and then you reintegrate at that point with the mother, at this point being matter itself, or the principle of the roots of your psyche or something. But you have to go through a process of psychological differentiation. And so one of these people I'm sure you've come across is Camille Paglia.
Oh, I've heard of her, yeah. I think
Well,
I've seen a few things by her.
she's somewhat of an androgynous figure herself. You know, she's hardline Aries type lesbian.
She's got a weird way of speaking, right? She talks a little bit like this, you know, right?
She's fast paced, intense, just the classic Mars Aryan type of flashy kind of communication, sharp, quick-witted. You know, and she's like, she in some ways herself considers herself somewhat of a transgender sort of figure, but she is completely on par with what we've been describing as the problems with all of this blurring of the sexes, and even her as a lesbian masculine type of woman. But she was really interested in her studies of the late phases of culture, like looking at what was going on in cultures pre-collapse. And she's saying we're seeing the same things now. And one of those traits of pre-civilization collapse is the blurring of the sexes. And I think what happens is it's like at a certain point, the culture becomes so inflated and it's like possessed by ideas and pulled out of the grounded reality to whatever degree we say
ideas.
Yes. Ungrounded, of course. Ideas that stem from an inability to relate to life.
Well, like
so it's
Dadaism.
it's whatever I think.
Dadaism at all? Dadaism was this thing in Europe, and I think it was in Germany before World War II, but it was basically like anything can be anything, right? And it's like, it was just like, but it wasn't about sex. It was about like art and things. And it was just like mundane stuff is just as good as whatever. And it was all like blended together in a soup, and there was no differentiation. So there was no meaning coming through.
Yeah. And so this is part of the thing. Oh, we're being progressive with all of our genders. It's like, no, this is a predictable form of mass psychosis as a result of people being. It's like when people get too comfortable, they get taken away. I think at the essence, it's a pulling away from nature, because nature keeps you grounded. You see these tribal societies, let's say, that still exist, that are grounded in their earthly. You know, they're simple, they've got their roles with men and women, and they're working with the land, they stay in relationship with the land. They look at us Westerners, they're like, what? Something's wrong in your head if you're a man and you think you're a woman, or whatever.
It's like there's progress, but then you hit the point of the progress, and then you just keep going in the same direction, and you miss it, And so, yeah, I mean, that's the shame. Like there's actual progress we can make culturally and as a society. But if we've just hit the brakes in this one direction that was progress at one point, and we just keep going there, we're not going to make the course correction to, get to something of more importance or more value.
Also, when you pursue freedom, because this is the whole thing with the West, it's like it's the concept of freedom, or the freedom of the individual, but there's a difference between true individuality and the emergence of that versus individualism and what becomes I just want to do what I want to do, and the narcissism, the atrophying into a kind of narcissistic, childish state where you can't have freedom without responsibility. And so if we say, okay, we want to be equal, or we want to be more balanced male and female, it's like, okay, but you have to take responsibility for the consequences of that. And this is something else that Camille Paglia talked about, where she said when she was in university in her early 20s, what they were rallying against was the freedom to be able to be on campus out at night, because at that time women had curfews. They had to be in bed by 11. It was like, we got to protect the girls from being raped. They're like, no, we want the freedom to risk rape. In her own words, like, we're our own individuals, we want to have the freedom. Where it's something that's reversed has happened now, where it's like, yeah, they got the freedom, but now all the university students are like, there's so little, the snowflake thing, right? And you got to create all these safe spaces.
Please keep your hate speech out of this campus!
It's like this weird thing where if you and this comes back to the women problem and the masculine thing, where it's like, if you reject responsibility, to whatever degree we say responsibility, let's say, is a masculine quality of like, you detach, you step up to the plate, you take responsibility, whatever. If you reject that, then you look for the external authority. That's the govern me harder daddy or meme thing, where you need that to come in. Yeah, govern me harder. It's like, I want more it's like, now I've got all this freedom,
Yeah,
but now I don't want to take
exactly.
responsibility.
That's what they say. The state is the new father. Like, you don't need the father in the home. You have the welfare check, and the state is the father. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's very problematic, and people they think they're fighting for freedom, but they're pushing for their own enslavement. And so you can't have freedom without responsibility. So people are trying to, I want to just be free to do whatever I want, and of course you become, that's the Pinocchio story, right, where he goes off and gets sucked into what's it called, Pleasure Island.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then it's just pursuing your pleasure all the time, and the kids get like eaten by it. You know, they become animals. They
turn
get
into
atrophied
donkeys,
into
right?
yeah, it's like very scary, gruesome image, but a tale of warning. And coming back to the Jungian thing, I mean, that's the other thing we've been disconnected from, is not just our own unconscious and our ability to relate to our interior realm and connect to that, but also things like fairy tales and folklore. I mean, the myths are the bigger level, but the fairy tales were those stories that rose out of, they say they're compensations for whatever is needing to come through in an image for the particular society or culture at the time. And
you mentioned the evolution earlier of the psychic substrate, and in the past, the Greek gods and other pantheons of gods. But today, I mean, we're still connected to it, but like in a more different way. Like, you see the superhero movies, right? Like those in some ways have become like a modern mythology, right? And but they maybe don't have the same richness as Grimm's tales and the Greek myths, which were connected to deeper esoteric meanings that people didn't necessarily understand, but that's what was behind these stories. Like Athena being born out of Zeus's leg, that had a specific symbolic meaning, and Hephaestus being the sort of disfigured blacksmith, that had another meaning. But
yeah,
but we have them today, but they're just not as maybe aligned with.
but we're not connected to them, and even there's been people as foolish to say like, oh, fairy tales with princesses are so sexist because the women are always in the role of damsel in distress. It's like, are you retarded? That has nothing to do with anything. The feminine falling into a deep sleep is a symbolic motif of slipping into the unconscious, and the way in which the masculine principle of consciousness awakens the dead feminine when consciousness has been, it's like the very fact that people can even make these superficial delineations of these things from this arrogant, egocentric point of view, like disassociated point of view, especially when women do it. It's like, sexist fairy tales. Like, you even interpreting the fairy tale like that is the form of sexism, which you think you're pointing the finger at. It's like, if you were connected to your own interiority, you couldn't misconstrue that. And so these are the women like, men. It's like they're being dominated by their own warped, demonic, shadowy, masculine qualities, which take a woman out of her own subjective realm. This is where we see these opinionated women who run their mouths off and they just refer to some weird collective idea. That's what the Animus does.
Sort of like Kathy Newman, that Jordan Peterson interview. Remember that?
Yeah.
Where everything he said was like characterized in the worst possible way, and then he flipped it around on her, and her like brain short-circuited from.
Yeah, I mean, these women are not conscious. They're being taken out of their own femininity, and this is what makes them so pissed off at some level. It's because their interior woman is enraged at consciousness. To whatever degree we say consciousness is the masculine, but it's pissed off at her own consciousness. And then, so when coming back to what we were saying, like, what if women don't want to get penetrated by truth, what do they want to get penetrated by? It's like the desire to be ravished, because that's part of like our instinctuality too. It's like the fact of penetration is a fact of life. So if you're refusing to be penetrated by truth, you're being penetrated by something else. And the reason why it's like women are getting raped internally by their own animus. And so when a man comes with a positive expression, or even a woman, because I've experienced it too, I've had women resist me even as a female, delivering what we might consider a masculine response, which would be a clear, objective, penetrating to the point, no nonsense, stop carrying on with your bullshit, this is what's going on. And they're wrestling with the part of themselves that is, it's like, of course a woman doesn't want to get penetrated by a rapist. It's like, do you know what I mean? But it's like it's confused, they're enmeshed, so that they're at some level reacting against being penetrated, but they haven't taken that responsibility of working out her own animus problem, how it's removing her from her own individuality, actually. Like a true feminine response to a situation would be to bring a degree of warmth and tenderness and insight into like what's really going on. Like if you've got all people having these intellectual debates or quarrels, a real feminine response
Like
would
the
just cut through it.
where the woman's sort of kidnapped by the dragon or the beast, and then the knight comes to save her, but she's kind of already lulled the beast into, you know, sort of a friendship or soothe its angry nature, that kind of thing.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, you know, and then these women who have this problem, then they go off, they're going, men, but then they get attracted to men who have these, this is the dark triad thing. And this is what even people like Peterson, I think, get this a little bit wrong. And he's right about, you know, that women are attracted to dark qualities because there's a certain degree of, there's like the instinctual quality there. But if it's the bad boy, nice guy split, then this is the animus problem. And so women get, men, but then she goes off and fucks the asshole who is like sexist and demeaning and degrading. Or she gets with the nice guy who's the impotent feminist who has an anima possession problem, and you see that all the time. I mean, anima possessed, like atrophied men with the animus hound woman, and she's the one bossing him around and being all, I mean, that dynamic is just fucking everywhere. And it's like but it's like she hates her own animus that's raping her, and of course in that she rejects and she has a resentment and a hatred towards men or the masculine, and so then she picks a man where it's like, but she disrespects the man in his weakness, and like, so there's all kinds of things that go on with this. And yeah, this is just completely atrophying our relational life. And of course,
Well,
the
it
other
sounds
problem
like
is
that's probably one of the two most important archetypes are this Anima Animus thing. I mean, I think, like you said earlier, we didn't get too far into it, is the parent archetypes are largely at play too. But
yeah.
understanding the male-female relationship is really core to where we are as a society, and we've kind of, you know, like with the everything is the same sort of thing. If everything's the same, you can't really think critically about it and adjust it and figure out what works and what doesn't, and what's appropriate and what's not.
If we take it to a spiritual principle, it really comes down to bringing love and consciousness into the equation, and then taking responsibility, and rather than playing the name and blame game, which is going on. That's the battle of the sexes, the quarreling between the opposites. This is infantile. These are unindividuated adolescent men and women, or boys and girls, I should more aptly say, with undifferentiated mother and father complex issues. You know, the projections going on here. These feminist women, you know, they're very man-hating, but we see that they're also very hateful towards women, and they attack women who have strong feminine identities, because that's a part of what's happening in their own psyches, is their animus has pulled them so far out of their own feminine center that
You're looked down on if
like,
you want to be a stay-at-home mom, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or yeah, it's exactly that thing of their own animus, because that's what the negative animus does to a woman. It dismisses and invalidates and I really came up with this problem in myself in my postpartum period, because I really got thrusted into all kinds of stuff that came up then, and that was what the animus problem in myself was doing. It was like the everyday mundane activities of just the normal life, washing the diapers, doing the dishes. It's like none of this has any meaning, you know. And it was being characterized by, I was like, I hate all of this. I hate doing this. This is like taking me away from what I'm supposed to be doing, all of this. And then when I caught it, I was like, because this is what part of the individuation work is doing. You need to see that it's not your voice, because at the beginning you think it's you, and then you go, no, it's not. This isn't actually what I think about myself.
It was just the
It's the
societal
archetype.
thought or programming that was.
Well, it was my negative animus, because I had a very negative animus problem. It didn't play out. I mean, I had a negative animus projection in a relationship when I was young. But I've been wrestling with my animus problem for many years now, and it's what Marie-Louise von Franz says. She's like, the kind of time it takes for a woman to deal with the animus problem, it's a long time, and it takes a lot of suffering. And this is what, of course, a lot of men and women aren't willing to do, is take the cross bear the cross of actually working with these energies inside of themselves. So for me, it hasn't been projected out onto men in a like that just it hasn't showed up for me. I don't have a feminist point of view, but
Because when you're
I'm very
unconscious, then it
consciously
starts projecting out there because you're not dealing
exactly
with it here.
exactly. And so when we take on consciousness, then it brings these things into light, and then we consciously suffer with them. And then we have to really see how they're destroying us and possessing us. And then it becomes much more of an insular, alive battle. Like I can wake up sometimes and I can be possessed by it, but at least I'm conscious of the fact that I'm possessed. Like, oh, here is this bastard. And he's there, and it's wanting to just destroy and atrophy everything about my feminine identity. And okay, then I've got the negative mother problem, and that exacerbates it. So it's just double the whammy of the bullshit.
But because you're conscious, it doesn't shift into you wake up and it's like, boy, my husband is so authoritarian and patriarchal, keeping me look after the kid, and because you can see.
Yeah, and sometimes there are little subtle things that come up. It never shows up as that. I mean, it's not like my husband is too domineering. I'm trying to think of ways in which.
Well, but people that are really possessed can find things where they aren't, right? Like,
yeah, and of course, this is the beauty of, we've talked about it's been a conversation about psychology today, but my husband and I are both working with the soul. So we both had when we came together, we'd had these metaphysical solar consciousness openings and experiences. So we had this mystical transpersonal core at the center of our relationship, which is, by the way, what you need to make marriage work. There needs to be a transcendent function. But when we first got together, it was like, okay, we're in the container of the relationship now. Now we're going to work out our psychological problems that are connected to the relational quality. So in the beginning, there was a very quick going through all of these different motifs. His anima problem came up. For him, it was a real distancing and a rejection of Eros. It was like part of his ancestry as well. And so he had dreams of like really, really gross women, slimy, like really warped Eros figures.
The hag
so all kinds
archetype,
of things.
that kind of thing.
Say again?
The hag archetype.
Oh, not even that. They'd be like kind of beautiful women, but it's like that warping of instinctuality, like, which was a reflection of his being cut off from instinctuality. So that was what showed up for him just in the beginning. And for me, it was more of the big thing that comes up for women when they start coming into true relationship like this is the problem of, it's the anima relative to the animus who's off and away and not relating to the animus. And it's something like, why are you not here? And that always is the core pain of the woman, is, why are you not here, consciousness? Why have you abandoned me, consciousness? And so that can show up in the relationship with the man. So this is aside from a man being, oh, you're just bossing me around trying to control me. That's like the very immature, superficial level at projection. What ends up coming up in the male-female dynamic is something like the woman opening into a degree of her femininity, and then the man rejecting that for some reason because the depth is confusing to him, or the feeling quality in that's confusing or scary, or it would call him into his own anima, deepening him into something in his own unconscious, which he's resisting. And so the dynamic is always something like, woman goes into the pain, why are you not here? Why are you not connected to me? Because that's the real anima function, or the feminine function is relatedness, is to bring the two together. So the function in relationship, this is all interesting when my husband and I got together, because now we're seeing the Shiva Shakti principle and what is the integrity and the intelligence of male-female relationship when this comes into its proper function, when you're bringing consciousness into it, and how does the relationship serve to deepen the psyche, and okay, where am I showing up as a kind of anima function for my own husband, inviting him into his unconscious with bringing the deeper feminine reflection, and where is he serving as the positive animus in some case. And of course our archetypes, our inner opposites are our own to integrate. But for instance, now I very rarely actually have the dynamics with James where I'm bringing him into the unconscious and there's some sort of quarrel or contention that happens, but this is what happens at the beginning for men and women. You work out that dynamic, and it's very intelligent how it works. But now this hardly ever happens because he's got such a refined interior connection to his own anima that he doesn't need me to actually lead him down anymore and serve as the mirror.
So
Genius.
what you're describing sounds to me, it's sort of like relationships are like the training wheels on a bicycle. And in the beginning stage, you're sort of playing out the opposite thing through your partner. But then as you get to a deeper level, you don't need those training wheels anymore. Not that you don't need your partner, but the same thing isn't playing out. You don't need that same thing projected back to you through them.
Of course, yeah, something like that. There's all kinds of things that come up because, I mean, we've also had Anima Animus projections come up with other people outside of the relationship, which can happen too. And that doesn't mean necessarily attraction, although it could be a magnetism, but it could also be like if I notice myself getting a bit pissed off by a certain kind of man, and I'm like, what's that? What is that trying to tell me about the Animus? Because it's all, and it's not.
You have a
that
very
we're going-
different reaction than most people.
Yeah. It's,
the excitement of, oh, there's something there, let me explore it. Whereas a lot of people, the average reaction is like, I don't want to look at it,
Don't want to look at it, or I just want to do the projection thing.
Yeah.
And so projection and what we project onto people is so nuanced. So what we're talking about with like, you just want to control me, patriarchal man, like that's almost the most gross, insensitive level of it. It gets so much more nuanced as you go into it. Like I would get activated around certain kinds of it'd just be real subtle versions of the animus problem. A good example even is not for my own experience here, but Jordan Peterson, for instance, is a great more developed animus figure for a lot of women, regardless of him and his shortcomings.
Well, most of his audience are men, but there's a strong number of women who follow him too.
Exactly, and that is the women who are they agree with what he's saying, of course, at an opinion level or his analysis on society or whatever, but there's also, he serves as a developing animus function, and the animus in a woman brings objectivity, insight, reflective capacity to herself. It's her inner objectivity which allows her to tap in or bring that level of what is going on. It's that inner scientist or something. So bringing meaning, the incarnation of meaning and the spirit principle, the spirit animus in that sense. So that's like more developed, women who'd be drawn to that are either developing that faculty within themselves or, something like that, where that would be a supporting figure. So in that case, also projection isn't a problem in and of itself, but it's more like, what is the psyche working on to integrate? So a woman could for some time be really into a guy like Jordan Peterson and really consume that content. And she could get to a point, let's say, where she integrates whatever her psyche was looking to get from that, and she may not feel the need to even watch that content anymore or something like that. So there's all kinds of interesting...
You mentioned something, not in the video, and another thing, about Libra projecting the two opposites. And it's like you project the opposites and then you work with them. And it seems like that's kind of what you're describing here. And then once you've sort of mastered them, then the projections aren't really needed anymore.
Yeah, and Libra is a sign of psychic wholeness. It's the lower psychological quality. It's the projecting out of the other part and the working out of who am I by what this thing is. And that's the mirror and the projection screen, and working out what you are based on your relationship to something else. And so there's a great genius in this. John Peterson, of course, is a Gemini and has a Libra moon, so he's got the Gemini and Libra are both bringing this and that thing together and looking at what the relationship is, or how do these two things come together and things like that. Or the 7th house in an astrological chart is the Libran house. You see that with a lot of therapists in that one-on-one dynamic where you did it. And in the Jungian stuff, you have this idea of transference or countertransference. So that's a language around what happens when a client projects something onto you, or the countertransference where both the therapist and the client project something onto each other. There's an actual term for that. And that's actually welcomed or considered in the psychoanalytic process. So once again, that the projection problem isn't necessarily a problem if consciousness is being brought to the table. It is a problem when it remains unconscious. Another example, of course, we talked about the Anima Animus and the death demon, or the deceptive crazy woman, and that can play out with men and women in relationships, or the kinds of people they're attracted to or whatever. But it can also be another archetype, is the archetype of the self, and that is the guiding center in the Jungian work. It's the guiding center of the personality. It's something like the greatest potential of the individual life that one could grow into. It's a really powerful archetype, and the inversion of that archetype is megalomania, or I am the god. And so that's where you see the cult leader with the shadow. He's been possessed by the archetype of the self. And then you have the people, the cult followers, project their own image of the self archetypally, like every potential of what they could be, and that, you know, it's the becoming of the true individual self, and whatever that unique core is
projected
meant
out
to bring
onto
into the world. The
cult
cult leader, and
Right.
that's also, by the way, the Leo Aquarius polarity. So in Aquarius, you've got the group think. In Leo, you've got the potential narcissist or whatever, you know, the Leonian Henry VIII or whatever. I am the state, you know, whatever. And you know, so that's where you get things of that nature happening as well. So there's all sorts of different things. But a
So
healthy
it sounds
expression
like,
would be,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
What were you gonna say?
Well, like a healthy expression of the self, let's say if you really are called to play the drums or something, you're like, really, that's got a lot of life and energy and passion for you in that. And you see a phenomenal drummer and you're like, oh, that person's amazing. And you know you're in the realm of projection when there's that quality of fascination.
Hmm.
It's not just, oh, that person's an awesome drummer. It's like, oh my God, this person's an awesome drummer. So, but that's an okay form of the projection, right? Because that's an indicator that you have that projected image because it's telling you something about where your own psyche is wanting to go. But it'd be a matter of whether you take the responsibility for actualizing that. Because if you don't, then you can also have the inverse thing where then you become really resentful of every drummer you see, of like, oh, but you have,
He's
it's
not
because
any
you
good.
haven't taken. Yeah, or I could have done it better, or even just the sense of insecurity it brings up with, like, I haven't brought this quality of myself into being, and I have this nervous restlessness that comes up whenever I'm around someone who embodies that expression of it or something like that. And so this is why when we talk about even relating it to the soul or working with the ageless wisdom or discipleship and all of this, when we talk about integrating the personality, it's that keen insight into what is the psychic structure doing and how are we projecting out these images, and to whatever extent we're mucking around with these parts of ourselves that are fragmented, and how they are disconnecting us from the soul's work, or even just psychologically the guiding center of the self. Or how are we playing out an animus demon problem with abusive men in relationships, or being cuckolded by animus hound women,
Well,
narcissistic
let's explore
personality
some of
types.
the transpersonal archetypes, because there's sort of archetypes that are created kind of from humanity itself, though those might sort of be interpretations of higher archetypes by humanity, but they're on a more personal level. But then there's archetypes that are more transpersonal, like you know, the astrological signs, right? Like those, the ideas that those exist independently of humanity, and we're responding to those energies, right? So can you talk a little bit more about
Yeah, I mean, this subject is like really what gets me going. I find this fascinating because it's very different if I look at, like, talking about everything we just talked about with the archetypes and the psychology and all of this. Is all lunar mystery stuff. It's all of that which is within substance and has evolved within materiality and the consciousness, which is a product of our evolution as human beings, versus that which, as you just said, is beyond humanity, and yet necessarily it's interacting with us. So to where is that crossover? How is it? So in the Ageless Wisdom teachings, you say, the Tibetan says a lot about response apparatus. So how are we, you know, everything depends on how the human being is responding to a certain energy. So, okay, humanity is starting to respond to the Pluto energy. So it's like, what makes a person respond to certain energies or whatever? We certainly see, I mean, the mythologies that we have, like Hephaestus, as you mentioned, that's Vulcan. Vulcan is a hypothetical planet in astrology, and we're told that it will be because to whatever degree the correspondence of planetary discoveries align with a certain critical mass response to a planetary energy, as we saw with Pluto and Uranus. I think even when it was discovered, it was in alignment with the telescope had been invented, and then someone saw Uranus with the telescope. And what's genius about that is the telescope allows you to see beyond what the immediate eye can see, and that's kind of a Uranian thing. It's like it's brilliant, you know, all of these little subtle connections with human consciousness. So where am I going with this? I mean, it's very intricate and complex. Necessarily our human consciousness is reacting to these influences, and that will change and evolve over time depending on, there's the occult scientific level of things here, where energies in the body, or when we're more heart polarized and less solar plexus and da.
And we also have the 7 rays, which is a relatively new concept in terms of history. But these rays cycle through humanity, sort of, it's similar to astrology, but it's like, this one ray will be coming into manifestation, and then after several hundred years, it'll sort of fade away and it'll stop affecting humanity as much. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on the incoming of the 4th ray of harmony through conflict. Next year, 2025, that's supposed to be when it's starting to come into manifestation. What you have any insights or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought too much on this, I mean, so much of my insight about the rays and the planets really just going through something in my own process, and something clicks, and then I'm like, oh, that's what it means when it's the gonads and whatever. And
it's a very Taurian way of dealing it, right? You've got it grounded
yes,
in the
personal experience. Yeah. That's what makes it a knowledge sign, right? Because it goes so deep into that, and then something twists over, and then it becomes the wisdom. It's what makes it a wisdom sign. But yeah, this 4th ray, I mean, we can only hope that it's going to bring this, certainly a surge of better art. Let's freaking hope. Obviously, we see the degeneration of, at least at a mass cultural level, art at this stage, but beauty, more innovative imagery, and an understanding of the pairs of opposites. I mean, this is all 4th ray stuff. The Anima and Animus problem is almost that, although it's a little bit more 7th ray, actually, I would say, which is why it's like Libra coming into prominence with
the
me
7th ray
the
being
Aquarian
the ray
age.
of ceremonial order or magic.
And corresponding to the physical plane, it's very much about substance. So if we think of Shakespeare was supposedly the great ascended master of the 7th ray, Master Al, apparently one of his incarnations was Shakespeare. And it's very interesting when you consider that, because a lot of the Shakespearean narratives are really hold the archetypal wisdom in them, and there's a lot of the interplay of the male and female characters, and the tragedies of the archetypal
Romeo and Juliet,
information.
the classic love story,
Yeah, so there's a lot in there. Taming of the Shrew, and the male female, that's the impenetrable feminine, and then it's all of this sort of stuff. So so there's something about the pairs of opposites in that sense. The 4th ray, it's a little different. I mean, India has a 4th ray personality, and we can see the vivid expressions of some of these more meta levels of opposites through, like, let's say, the Hindu images. And there's much more of a balance between, to whatever, I don't know what is the current situation in terms of the religiosity of it now in the 21st century, but in terms of when we look at the images and sense the esoteric underpinnings, you really see like the feminine images in the Indian or the Hindu goddesses. I mean, they're so different from, let's say, the Mother Mary image.
Yeah,
and we don't really have much in the West, and this is also probably part of the problem too, with our lack of images for feminine. Yeah, it's just not a very developed image.
Well,
yet,
that's part of the
West.
worldwide masculine feminine thing, right? The East is more feminine from a certain perspective, and the West is more masculine. And what we're doing on a world level is how do we integrate the best of both those things and put away the things that don't work for each of those.
Yeah, India brings a lot of the wisdom and the body intelligence too, and it speaks to these modes and beings of consciousness, like part of the Kali image, she chops off the heads. That's this instinctual, it speaks to a mode of being that we have access to in terms of our human experience. And of course, the human kingdom is also the 4th ray. And so the human wisdom, I think, and qualities of consciousness through our humanities, those images in Hinduism, I find really speak to those qualities a bit more dynamically and interestingly. Ganesha with the quality of mind, and the scribe, and or the awareness of emptiness in the East. We don't really have that piece in the West, like the emptiness thing or the nothing. I think that's a really important part of masculine realization from that comes from the East.
Because we're focused on the outer reality and the mind in use of building civilization and things, right? Like we want to build up buildings and structures, and just having empty lots is not what we're about in the West.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's the emptying out of the head, and moving into that, which becomes the containing quality of the masculine. It's very, very different, and we have that disconnection from that in the West, because we have that noise, and it's all of that which concentrates and becomes those forms of many identities and all of that. So it's that harmony there versus like when we bring in the Western capacity for that penetrative focus, which allows for more concretized building or something like that. Yeah. But there's so many different things here. I mean, it's not really a direct
it's funny
answer
you
to
brought up the seventh ray in addition to the fourth ray. The Tibetan talks about that the temple of God is created when you have the seventh ray and the fourth ray in manifestation. And he says the last time that came about was in Atlantean times. And since then, we haven't had this same alignment of the seventh ray and the fourth ray there. So in addition to the art and beauty, there's this opportunity for the restoration of the mysteries and the sort of building of the outer temple of God that's connected to the inner temple of God in some sense.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll see what that looks like. It might take a while. I'm not expecting it to happen in
Yeah.
a year or two.
Yeah, it'll be beyond our time probably. I mean, we're in the 8th month gestationally according to DK, so it's something like, we're preparing the way for the birth somehow. So
When was the first month?
Oh, I don't know actually. I can't recall what he.
Because if the first month was in 2000, then the 9th month is right around the corner.
No, he's speaking.
First
No,
month.
it wasn't that close. It was more like speaking to this moving into the Aquarian age and bringing about the new kinds of patterns and the archetypes coming through that are going to be that which plays this dominating role as we move into the Aquarian age.
Well, that's another interesting thought of new archetypes that aren't in existence already, right? And you see like the pioneers of the race, whether it's religious or in art, are bringing down, even if it's just a little bit, some sort of new idea or archetype that's grounding this energy that's coming through. And then someday we'll look on that as like, the Greek gods that have always been there and have always been in the background of civilization. But somebody's got to bring it down at first.
Yeah, I mean, and even just re-emerging and seeing what they do when we reintegrate them with the kind of consciousness that we're sitting with right now, at a mass level. I mean, Jung said that the gods have been banished, to the inner realm, and there they are wreaking havoc.
So the what realm?
To the inner realm or the unconscious,
realm.
And they're in the shadow, and so they're still a part of our makeup, though. I mean, yeah, we moved into monotheism with Christianity, and okay, this took away the idolization of the polytheistic pagan gods or whatever, but they do still speak to psychological forces or qualities of consciousness that are still part of how we move and operate. And that's why Jung said, at least from a psychological standpoint, he felt that alchemy was going to be that which helped heal or be the next step from the Christian problem in terms of what Christianity has given to us, and also the problems that have come with that from a collective level psychologically. There's the looking up into the heavens, but we're moving away from, once again, the idol worship of the instinctual. No, we're no longer animal sacrificing. It's just the one God. But how do we then reintegrate? What are those energies that the polytheistic religions were speaking to? Because they are there, they do exist. Okay, maybe we don't.
Well, some of that's
run around
with the saints, right? Like especially in Catholicism, you got all these saints. You got the saint for this, the saint for that, and that's to some degree. I mean, maybe not the same, but it's taking all these different aspects and putting them there in the consciousness.
Yeah. So there's a great work to be done, and the real invitation for the time right now is we're really in a pressure cooker of having to synthesize all of these different components. If we're responding to consciousness and we're working with the soul, or we're working with an understanding of what the present time demands and what we're trying to move into, we have to really, it's the Leo part of the Aquarian piece of bringing it all into the self and metabolizing that and integrating and what are we supposed to be synthesizing here, and how does that allow us to be able to step into group activity or world service, or what does it mean?
So it's not about rejecting archetypes, it's about figuring out where they belong, right? because it's when they get out of place into the wrong area, that's when they start wreaking havoc.
It's the repression or the suppression idea or anything that's in the unconscious. I mean, that's the famous quote, right? Is that, you know, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will project outside of you, or you'll see it outside of you, and you'll call it fate. Oh, it's my destiny. But it's part of you, you know, and we bring these things into our lives in these weird, strange ways. If you have an innocence complex, then you somehow find yourself constantly being deceived by malevolent people and individuals, you know, and so why do you keep attracting demons into your life? It's like, oh, you know, if you just have a religious standpoint, it's like, oh, the demons are trying to get me, or people just don't like
I knew somebody
no.
who would often talk people's ears off, and he'd say he was either taken advantage of or put upon by somebody, or he resisted them and wound up being triumphant, you know, but it was always one of the two, basically.
Yeah, it's like, what is that? And so the humility of and also to whatever degree this is a feminine quality too, of actually looking exactly at what's going on in the specifics of your life. Because if we talk about spiritual principles, or that's sometimes the problem, it's not the problem with the ageless wisdom teachings in and of themselves, it's more the problem that people who interpret the teachings can run into if they stay in it being a conceptual or out there idealism or mentating philosophical blah blah blah, rather than really taking on what these broader principles really are trying to point us to in terms of what it means to really take responsibility for living those principles. Because, like, okay, you're going to follow the principle of goodwill or love. Okay, you got to have the transpersonal principle, but what does that actually look like when you're dealing with the power dynamic in your workplace, or when you have this weird repeating pattern in a relationship, or why you have trouble making money or stepping into your true work that you want to do? We have to be making it real and connecting that into substance, which is also a seventh ray quality, or the fourth ray quality that's psychological. It's dealing with the conflicts of our human life. Okay, and maybe that's coming back to your question about the fourth ray coming in, something like that. Much more of an embrace of what's really happening in our human experience.
I mean,
And
maybe
how
it's
do
part
we
of a foreshadowing is all the conflict, certainly in the US, but probably also in the West, between these sort of polarities, especially in the US politically, like you're mentioning the for and against Trump stuff and all of that. But there's something hopeful. DK mentioned that he's talking about the fourth ray. In the past, the conflict aspect was emphasized, but he was saying when it incarnates today, the harmony aspect is going to be dominant. So that's a hopeful sign.
It is a hopeful piece, and we have to live that in our daily lives to be custodians of that. And we can hope that people are going to be more responding to not just the Uranian influence and the fifth ray, seventh ray qualities of the Aquarian age, but also the Jupiterian second ray quality, because Jupiter is the esoteric ruler of Aquarius. So necessarily it's going to bring this urge towards synthesis, moving with love, moving with a greater spiritual purpose, or, you know, to whatever degree Jupiter is the guru, even exoterically the guru, or the teacher who brings together all the ideas, these sorts of things. So we can hope that there'll be more and more people responding to those undercurrents as well. And I think we see that. I think that we're seeing these two things as we move into this new age. We are seeing a rise in the conflicts and an exaggeration or a real clarification on the realities of these things here. But we're also seeing an urge towards truth, I think, and an urge toward, we see people trying to work these things out or enter the space, and what does this really mean, and a revival of spirituality, even if it is a religious quality, but moving with ideas of transpersonal love or
Yeah,
something.
things aren't working out today, and people have a sense of reaching out to find out what's really true, what's really going on.
Yeah.
So let's move into wrapping up here. It's been a great conversation, and I'd love to have you back on again. But the final question, I've started a new question. I have another question I asked to most people, but people who are interested in the ageless wisdom, I'm going to start putting a different question to them. And that question is, what aspect of the plan should we be what would you like to draw light to? What aspect of the plan should be focused on that maybe isn't known to humanity or we're not focused enough on currently? The divine plan.
I really think it comes back, like, when I really feel into what is most pertinent in myself. It comes back to what we were just hinting at there, with needing to take on that responsibility for synthesizing all these things at an individual level. For me, I'm always responding to that which brings it down to the most intimate and personal level. We have to step into walking that responsibly. I think as much as there's a seventh ray quality coming through, it's an echo to the first ray, actually. And I
The
think
first ray
I
of will
still
or power.
will and power. The seventh ray is the focused and differentiated first ray energy, which brings it into materiality. So there's a certain oomph for that organizing, let's get it done quality, which is a slight echo to the first ray. But I think courage, that's one thing I wish I saw a little bit more of in people. Courage to make mistakes, courage to step out and be willing to fall on their faces in the name of working out these problems. Because it's one thing to sit and meditate and consider, especially as second or third ray people. That's part of how we work, to bring consciousness to things. But the first ray master Moria, one of his great quotes that I often come back to was, better to act in error than to commit the error of inaction. And I think people need to carry that a little bit more, because even when you walk and you stumble, at least you gain more information. It's a bit of the Buckminster Fuller thing there. If whenever you're moving from A to B, there's something going on at 90 degrees. There's always something else happening in a way that you can't quite see. It's the bee is
Well,
trying
that's
to get
that
the
fourth
pollen
ray
for the honey.
process there. You have to be willing to, potentially have a conflict or bring the conflict to light to then eventually resolve it into a true harmony, not a kind of false, we don't talk about it harmony, not a superficial thing, but a real understanding of what's going on beneath.
Yeah. Yeah. So the invitation, I had to go, okay, people, here is this thing. It's be a little bit more ballsy. Like, take the courage, move with courage, go to the place that brings up fear. Go to the place that really makes the growth and the tests real. And you will see that or feel that through coming up against your edge. Move into that which terrifies you. Move into that which necessarily brings up every other limitation that you possess, because it's not till we really demand to move with that which is greater, or the greatest part of ourselves, that we really come up against our own shadow or the dweller on the threshold. And the evils that we see in the world right now, that's part of the planetary dweller. And we can stay preoccupied with that, or we can start the real work of really testing that edge in ourselves through, diving into the deep, even if it means we flounder for a little bit and splutter. Yeah.
Nice, good food for thought and good insight there. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Risa. It's been a great conversation. I hope everybody else out there enjoyed it. And if they'd like to find out more about you, or you have anything you want to plug in particular.
Well, there's just my YouTube, really, Soul Science by Risa, and my Instagram. I also share the Instagram information with Facebooks, if people aren't on Instagram, on Facebook. And there's just other little tidbits and information, bits and bytes there. I often do little slideshow posts about the different zodiacal signs, for instance, or make commentary about some of the transits that are happening, and try and bring a both esoteric, occult point of view plus a psychological point of view, and invite for just a bit more reflection there, so people find it useful for the most part. And yeah, that's Soul Science by Risa on all of those.
And people can get an astrology, they could book you for an astrology reading and also do some one-on-one work, right?
Yes, with the astrology stuff, I can call myself an esoteric astrologer, but it's really the gateway into what I then turn into a much more personal, investigative or therapeutic quality. So I tend to start with a reading, and depending on what the person's looking for, we can clarify what is the soul trying to do, how does the deeper self want to emerge, or what are the hindrances to that. Okay, I know my soul purpose, but I'm stagnating, or I have this drama in my life. And so I'm always interested in both, what is the inner self wanting to do, and what's preventing that. So we can get nice and specific there. And that's my favorite part. We get the overall blueprint, but then, you know, the map is not the territory. And then we get into like, okay, where is your father complex? And why are you not, like, what is it? Oh, let's look at the dreams, you know. So it can get interesting and fun and much more intimate and also direct and practical as well.
All right, and if you got this far, why don't you leave a like on the video and share it with some people you might think it's of value to them, and consider subscribing to the channel, and also check out Risa's channel.
Risa, by the way.
Sorry, I'm so used to Risa's channel.
Lisa with an R.
All right, well, take care, everybody. May the force be with you, and good luck in the shadow work.